Welcome to a Revelation of Jesus. In this video, we will explore the identity of the locust army that comes out of the bottomless pit in the fifth trumpet by comparing it with the final king of the north in the book of Daniel. In video 30, we examined the links that showed that the locust army war of Revelation 9 is the same war that is described in the book of Joel. We also saw that the locust war in the book of Joel is the same as the final battle between the king of the north and the king of the south in Daniel chapter 11. This means that the last battle in Daniel 11 is the same as the seven trumpets war in Revelation 9. In this video, we are going to highlight key points in the long war between the king of the north and the king of the south in order to identify the end-time combatants in this terrifying war that lies just ahead of us. It would be helpful for you to review video 3, which looks at all of Daniel's visions. There we learn that the visions of Daniel are parallel. They all begin in Daniel's time and proceed to the final judgment and establishment of the eternal kingdom, covering the world history that had an impact on God's chosen representatives. Let's look at the highlight of these visions to give a context for Daniel 11. The first vision in Daniel chapter 2 sets the pattern. A massive multi-metal image has a head of gold that symbolizes the Babylonian Empire that took Israel captive. Babylon was defeated by the Medo-Persian Empire, symbolized by the arms and chest of silver, which ruled over God's chosen people during the time of Esther. The belly of bronze symbolized the Greek Hellenistic kingdoms that ruled Israel during the time between the Old and the New Testament. The Roman Empire, symbolized by the waist and thighs of iron, ruled during the time of Christ until its breakup in the 5th century. Rome evolved into a hybrid empire consisting of European nation-states bound together by Roman Catholicism, symbolized by legs and feet of iron mixed with clay. Finally, at the end of time, God brings the oppressive kingdoms to an end and fills the earth with his eternal kingdom. The other visions in Daniel follow the same outline with increasing details. In Daniel chapter 7, the prophet saw 4 wild animals rising out of the sea: a lion, a bear, a 4-headed leopard, and a fearsome beast, symbolizing Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome. 10 horns emerge out of the head of the fearsome Roman beast, followed by a dominant horn with eyes and a mouth. This symbolizes the union of European nations and corrupt religion that severely oppressed God's faithful followers during the Dark Ages. Finally, a judgment was made in favor of the saints of the Most High, and the time came for the saints to possess the kingdom. The vision of Daniel 8 covers the same historical outline under the symbols of a ram, a goat, and a huge evil horn. The oppression would continue for 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary shall be cleansed. Video 3 gives a lot more details about these 3 visions, which sets the stage and gives the context for the vision of Daniel 11. This vision covers the same overview of history, but instead of symbols, it uses a detailed literal narrative. It begins in the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia. Cyrus led the Persians in their conquest of Babylon. The vision continues with the history of the powers that oppressed God's people until the time of the end, when there will be a time of trouble such as never was, and God's people will be delivered. Throughout the narrative are landmarks that will allow us to correlate this vision with Daniel's other 3 visions. The angel messenger starts the narrative by informing Daniel that 3 more kings will arise in Persia, and the 4th shall be far richer than them all. He shall stir up all against the realm of Greece. The 4th king who would stir up all against the realm of Greece was the immensely wealthy Xerxes, also known as Ahasuerus, the husband of Queen Esther. He launched a series of disastrous attacks against Greece, just as the prophecy specified. The narrative then skips over the remaining 8 kings of Persia down to the time of Alexander the Great, a mighty king who shall rule with great dominion. This sets a pattern for the rest of the vision. As the narrative progresses from one empire to the next, there's quite a bit of detail about the first few kings, enough to clearly identify who the vision is talking about, and then it skips over long periods to the next landmark. Notice the details about Alexander, the first king of the Greek Empire. The mighty king shall do according to his will, and when he is arisen, his kingdom shall be broken up and divided towards the four winds of heaven, not among his descendants, but for others besides these. History tells us that at the peak of his power, Alexander died, and his empire, instead of going to his descendants, was divided among his four generals. Let's compare this passage with the other visions of Daniel to show how the parallel visions confirm the meaning of each other. In Daniel chapter 8, Alexander, the first king of the kingdom of Greece, is symbolized by a large horn on a powerful male goat. But when he became strong, the large horn was broken, and in place of it 4 notable horns came up towards the 4 winds of heaven. We already read that the mighty king in chapter 11 also had his kingdom broken up and divided towards the 4 winds of heaven. In chapter 7, the leopard that symbolizes Greece had 4 heads and 4 wings. The division of the Greek Empire into 4 is a major landmark. Competing Hellenistic kingdoms evolved out of the division of Alexander's Greek Empire. The most prominent and the focus of Daniel 11 are the Seleucid kingdom, called the King of the North, which was centered in modern Syria and Turkey, and the Ptolemaic kingdom, called the King of the South, which was centered in Egypt. The wars and intrigues of the first few kings of the North and South are presented in Daniel's vision with such remarkable accuracy and detail that many commentators insist that it must have been written after the fact. God's chosen representatives lived in the land of Palestine between the 2 powers and were oppressed by both of them. Although this section is highly detailed, it tends to be confusing, mentioning he, his, they, she, without making it clear who it is talking about. Historians have spent years combing the historical records to correlate this passage with the people involved. We could go along verse by verse and try to pinpoint the people and events, but the point is that Daniel 11 uses detailed descriptions at important inflection points to allow us to know where in history we are. The next important landmark is in verse 16, when a new power comes upon the scene. He who comes against the king of the north shall do according to his own will, and no one shall stand against him. He shall stand in the glorious land with destruction in his power. The destructive power that defeated the Seleucid king of the north and took over the glorious land of Palestine was Rome, both in history and in the previous visions of Daniel. Notice how Rome is described in the wild animal vision of chapter 7. Behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong, devouring, breaking in pieces, and trampling the residue with its feet. Similarly, in the metal image of Daniel 2, the 4th kingdom shall be strong as iron, inasmuch as iron breaks in pieces and shatters everything, and like iron that crushes, that kingdom will break in pieces and crush all the others. That is exactly what happened. Rome conquered the Seleucid kingdom and became the new king of the north. Rome destroyed the Ptolemaic king of the south in the Battle of Actium in BC 31, and the king of the south disappears from the narrative for the next 10 verses. The first of the new Roman kings of the north are described in detail. In particular, Julius Caesar with his conquests, relationship with Cleopatra, and assassination in verses 17 through 19, and Caesar Augustus, whose worldwide census is mentioned both in verse 20 and in Luke 2 verse 1. After this, a vile person shall arise, highlighting the most vile deed of the Romans and providing an important landmark, the murder of the Son of God. The prince of the covenant shall be swept away from before him and be broken. The next transition that we expect is the evolution from pagan Roman Empire to the apostate Christian Empire of the Dark Ages. The essence of the destructive iron and clay legs of chapter 2 and the persecuting horns in chapter 7 is the oppressive union of church and state. This union is called the League in chapter 11. And after the league is made with him, the king of the north shall act deceitfully, for he shall come up and become strong with a small number of people. Although the Roman Catholic papacy was a small organization with no army, it became a uniting and even ruling influence among the European nations. He shall enter peaceably, even into the richest places, and he shall devise his plans against the strongholds. A word count shows that in Daniel's visions the oppressive church-state union gets the most attention. This is because the medieval union of church and state is a model for the final persecuting power that will arise during the time of the end. I will include a link in the description to a table that shows the horn with a mouth and eyes in Daniel chapter 7, the great evil horn of chapter 8, the medieval king of the north in Daniel 11:23-39, and the beast from the sea in Revelation 13 all refer to the oppressive medieval church-state union. This allows us to get a complete picture of how apostate religion manipulated ruthless and corrupt political powers during the Dark Ages. This is vital because, as we will see in Revelation chapter 17, the final oppressive power will share the same characteristics and strategies, but with a worldwide scope. Continuing in Daniel 11, we see in verse 25 that the king of the south is back. The king of the north shall stir up his power and his courage against the king of the south with a great army, and the king of the south shall be stirred up to battle with a very great and mighty army, but he shall not stand. The southern power that threatened the very existence of papal Europe was militant Islam, which had conquered the Middle East, parts of Spain, and was threatening the Christian Byzantine Empire. The last straw was when the Seljuk Turks began to interfere with pilgrims traveling to Jerusalem. Pope Urban II energized the European leaders to carry out the first Crusades starting in AD 1096. The Turks opposed them with a very great and mighty army, but ultimately they were conquered, in line with the prophecy, "The king of the south shall not stand." The Muslims gradually regained control of the Holy Land over the next 200 years, despite 2 more Crusades that are not mentioned in Daniel 11. But the 4th Crusade is an important landmark and gets quite a bit of attention. At the appointed time the king of the north shall return and go towards the south, but it shall not be like the former or the latter. For ships from Kittim shall come against him. Therefore he shall be grieved and return in rage against the holy covenant, and do damage. They shall take away the daily sacrifices, and place there the abomination of desolation. You may find it interesting to read about the history of the 4th Crusade, in which European crusaders conspired with the Venetians with their ships of Kittim to destroy the Christian Byzantine capital of Constantinople instead of the Muslims in Jerusalem. I will put a link in the description to an article that gives some of the relevant details. Most importantly, after the disastrous 4th Crusade, Pope Innocent III, in a rage against the Holy Covenant, initiated the Inquisition, the abomination of desolation of the Dark Ages. It was a preview of the universal abomination of desolation that will enforce the mark of the beast, as described in Matthew 24 and Revelation 13. Consistent with the long decline of the Turkish Ottoman Empire after the Crusades, the king of the south again disappears from the narrative, and the focus of verses 30 through 39 is on the power politics of the persecuting religious power of the Middle Ages. It was a dark time, but also a time when God's faithful followers let their lights shine. The king of the north shall do according to his own will. He shall exalt and magnify himself above every god, shall speak blasphemies against the God of gods, and shall prosper. But the people who know their God shall be strong, and carry out great exploits. And those of the people who understand shall instruct many. Yet for many days they shall fall by the sword and flame, by captivity and plundering. Now when they fall they shall be aided, to refine them, purify them, and make them white. It was during this time of darkness and persecution that courageous reformers illuminated the world with the light of the gospel. At this point, the narrative skips down to the time relevant to our study of the 7 trumpets. At the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind with chariots, horsemen, and with many ships. Here we see the return of the king of the south, which marks the beginning of the final war. Let's review some important points from this brief overview of the history of the kings of the north and south. First of all, these kings have evolved over the course of history. The king of the north begins as a Hellenistic Seleucid kingdom, is replaced by the pagan Roman Empire, and evolves into the medieval Holy Roman Empire. We should note that in the other 3 visions of Daniel, the union of church and state that was established during the Dark Ages is the final empire before God intervenes. This means that the end-time king of the north is simply a modern, more universal version of the medieval union. The king of the south begins as a Hellenistic Ptolemaic kingdom in Egypt, is destroyed by Rome and disappears, reappears as militant Islam during the time of the Crusades, and then disappears again until the time of the end. We also learned that the king of the north starts with its center in Syria, shifts to Rome, and then to Europe. The king of the south begins in Egypt and later takes over the North, Africa, and the Middle East. But wherever they were centered, the king of the north was always geographically north of the king of the south. This would make it difficult to consider the final king of the south to be eastern countries like China or northern countries like Russia, as some commentators have postulated. The fact that the final king of the north is a continuation of the medieval union of church and state suggests that the final king of the south will also be a continuation of the power that opposed him, in other words, militant Islam. This would also fit geographically, as the traditionally Christian nations are to the north of the Islamic powers. It also fits politically now, when radical Islam is extremely hostile towards the northern powers. With this in mind, let's see how the final battle of the war between the kings of the north and south correlates with the trumpet war in Revelation 8 and 9. At the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack the king of the north, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots, horsemen, and with many ships. Here is predicted the resurgence of militant Islam, the final king of the south, with a powerful, coordinated end-time attack against the king of the north that provokes a massive counterattack. Who will the final king of the north be? The parallel visions of Daniel show us that it will be a continuation of the medieval union of church and state that ruled in Roman Catholic Europe. When we study Revelation chapters 13 and 17, we will see that this union, symbolized by a 7-headed beast, has a major ally at the time of the end, a beast with 2 horns like a lamb that arises from the earth. We will have to wait for another video to show that this beast symbolizes Protestant America. Corrupt Protestant and Roman Catholic leadership will unite with the military might of America, Europe, and no doubt a global network of other allies. Putting all that we have learned together, we can predict that the time of trouble will begin when militant Islamic powers launch an attack, probably nuclear, on Europe or the United States. This attack constitutes the first 4 trumpets, and the chaotic conditions that result are called the opening of the bottomless pit. The King of the North Alliance will carry out a massive counterattack with an army that John describes as locusts in the 5th trumpet. In the next video, we will see the emergence of the angel from the bottomless pit and the fearful continuation of the war in the 6th trumpet. But what about God's faithful followers? Will they be collateral damage in this war, or even targets as they were during the Dark Ages? The short answer is that the Locust War is just an introduction to the real and glorious focus of the 7 trumpets in Revelation 10 and 11. It will be a trying time for everyone, but just as in the medieval time of persecution, the people who know their God shall be strong and carry out great exploits. The best is yet to come. If you want to see other videos in this series, you can check out the Revelation of Jesus playlists. I'll include the link in the description.